This is IAQradio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your host, Radio Joe Hughes, and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day, wherever you're listening from, and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week is episode number 515, and we visit with an old friend of the show and one of our most active guests over the years, Mr. Don Weeks. Looking forward to a great show with Don. Before we get started, I want to thank our platinum sponsor.
IAQradio Platinum sponsor is John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com.
I also want to thank our gold sponsors, Particles Plus, Healthy Indoors Magazine, Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, and AEML Inc. Laboratory. And of course, our association sponsors, the Indoor Air Quality Association and the Restoration Industry Association.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
Hello, everyone. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, Friday, September 7, 2018, has been sponsored by Ideas, the solution chemistry company, creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Here is today's trivia question. What is the formal name of the book edited by Bradley Prezant, Donald Weeks, and J. David Miller, nicknamed the Green Book? Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Cliff. Okay, today's guest is Don Weeks. He's a certified industrial hygienist and a certified safety professional who recently retired from InAIR Environmental, which is based in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He's a past president of the Indoor Air Quality Association, as well as a past president of the Ottawa Valley Chapter of ASHRAE. He is currently the president of the Indoor Environmental Quality Global Alliance, and also serves as a member on the board of directors of the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. I want to do this without giving away the answer to the trivia question.
Somebody got it already, don't worry.
Oh, somebody got it? Okay, better yet. Don's a four-time recipient of AIHA's Bestseller Award for the report of the Microbial Task Force in 2001 and 2002, and assessment remediation and post-remediation verification of mold in buildings in 2004, and also the Green Book, Recognition, Evaluation, and Control of Indoor Mold, which was the trivia question for today. Don, welcome to IAQ. Welcome back to IAQ Radio. Great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Good to see
Don,
you guys.
I want to let's get to the big change for you, at least first. In the intro, we said you were the past. Recently retired from InAIR Environmental. Maybe tell listeners a little bit about what happened there.
Well, what happened was that basically I decided it was time for me to move on. So we've been working on the idea of selling the company for about a year and a half, and we had a very fortunate situation with another company, an engineering company called Meriton, owned by two brothers, Jimmy and Johnny Chowan. And we had worked with them on a number of projects, and I approached them about the idea of potentially working with us, or basically buying us. And it was like it always is when you have a legal situation. It is the lawyers that dictate how long it takes to actually happen. And it took some time to get it all together, but as of August 1st, InAIR Environmental is now a sister company of Meriton, and I am retired. I help out on occasion, but my job is basically to make sure that things are go in the right direction. But for the most part, I am now on my own. Don't earn any money from anybody, so I can now say whatever I want to say, and nobody has to get upset about it.
Well, having gone through that sale of a business, Dawn, are there any tips you could give listeners who are business owners out there to help better prepare them for if and when that day finally comes?
Yes, I think one of the key things that we learned was that it's probably not a good idea to approach your competitors. One of the things that you think you want to do is you want to basically try to work with somebody or sell to somebody who's already in your business. In actual fact, what we found out is that that's very difficult because they have their own way of doing things and they have their own techniques. They have, and they figure, well, if you go away, I can get your clients anyway, so why should I pay for them? It's much better to go with somebody who is looking to expand their business, but has a kind of a different perspective. In this case, it was mechanical engineering, than what we did. And their idea is to build environmental into the mechanical engineering and vice versa. And that really is going to be a good challenge for them. I think it's a good idea to approach people who are doing things other than what you do to kind of see what they might be interested in buying your company. So for me, it was, and for Lanchi, it was a really good experience, and look, I think they're going to do very well with the two combined companies.
Dawn, did you have an intermediary represent you, or did you do it yourself?
Well, we did it ourselves in this particular case because we knew that the potential client or the people that we wanted to sell to. But I did think about going to somebody other than directly to the companies. But it was better in this case because we were able to work out most of the details in advance before we got the lawyers involved. And then once we had the lawyers involved, as I said, it took a little longer than we would like it to take, but we had most of the major issues, the sale price, things of that nature, which we settled among ourselves, and then basically we had the legals make sure that all the the I's were dotted and the T's crossed to make when we actually did the sale transaction on August 1st. Okay, thanks.
Well, do you have any feel for how soft or how strong the market is for indoor environmental, or I get you're kind of a mix of industrial hygiene and indoor environmental quality. Any feel for how strong the market is for people to purchase companies like that?
I think the market is strong in certain locations. I think that, for example, I know right now that there's a great individual groups that are working to do this type of work, not only in North America, but overseas, and particularly in Asia. And if you have that combination of being able to provide that services over there, plus do it here in North America, you're in very good shape to sell. If, on the other hand, you're a very local-based company, I think it's much more difficult because, as I said, your competitor is going to look at it and say, well, I'm not going to buy them because basically once they're out of business, I can basically pick up their clients without having to pay a cent. And so it's difficult when you're a relatively small company and you have a very regional type basis. I think you have to look, as I said, for other type of companies that are in the business, but not necessarily yours directly, if you want to sell that business. So I don't think the market is soft or hard. I think it just depends on the circumstances under which you find yourself and where you are geographically.
All right, let's move on to Indoor Air 2018, Dawn. That's a conference that I really wish I could have attended. Unfortunately, I didn't make it. I'm having some back issues, and sometimes a long drive like that just isn't in the plans. But you did get to attend at least part of it, and I was wondering if you could tell listeners a little bit about, what the hot research topics were this year, and then any presentations that kind of caught your eye, and maybe something that listeners could learn that weren't able to attend.
Yeah, I mean, it was in Philadelphia. I came down for the day because I was on vacation. Took the Excella down, which was quite comfortable and quite interesting to ride on, and spent the day in Philadelphia at the conference. There were 881 different presentations and posters, and what I was immediately impressed by was the biodiversity the diversity of the attendees. I mean, there were at least 45 to 50 countries represented there, and the type of presentations. I'll give you some of the ones that I was able to sit in a little bit on. There was one that was on culturally appropriate household heating transition for the Navajo Nation, and it was presented by people who were actually part of the Navajo Nation and what they were doing in terms of working with the nation itself as to what is culturally appropriate and what can be used in their different dwellings. And also, how about impact of water? Well, it was basically water pipe smoking on indoor air quality. I had not really thought about that as being a real big issue, but apparently it can be if it's not adequately exhausted. And then the other one that caught my eye was one that we've talked before about Rich Corsi in indoor air. Reduction of exposures to airborne particles while sleeping. Rich is very famous for having pointed out how much percentage of our lives we spend in bed. 26 years of our life apparently is spent in bed if we live to an average age of 79. So basically, you have to figure out what kind of problems might you have while you're sleeping, and what causes we've all probably experienced this, where we woken up with coughing or sneezing or something of that nature. What are the particles effects that you have while you're sleeping that may be a problem that you may have with regards to your ventilation system, covers that you may be using, things of that nature. What direction, do you sleep on your side? Do you sleep on your back? Things of that nature, which really are important because, as I said, 26 years of our lives were spent in sleeping. It makes sense that we look at the indoor air quality for that.
And what you mentioned sleeping on your side, sleeping on your back. I would imagine sleeping on your back is better, but did he indicate one way or the other?
He's basically, the presentation talked about different positions and the percentage of those individuals that ended up coughing. It seems that more of it is actually, as you would expect, it's more of an age type of situation. The older you get, the more likely you're going to have problems. Yes, back is the best position, but if you sleep on your side and when you're younger, it's not going to be as big a problem. And the other thing is you have to have sources. Some people sleep with ventilation, air conditioning going. That may or may not necessarily prevent exposure to particles because you may not have an adequate filter. The other problem is, what time of year are we talking about? This time of year, as some of us know, it's a time when we have a lot more particles in the air from pollen and things of that nature. How do you filter that out so it doesn't interrupt your sleep? So it's an interesting presentation in that regard.
It brings up a couple of thoughts. One is, I don't know if listeners are all aware or not. We're going to do a show on this if we can squeeze it in somewhere, but EPA recently updated their filtration guide on their website, and they put a lot of new information in there, a lot of it based on research that people have done, and some on air filtration during sleep, using portable air cleaners, etc. Very nice document. I'll put a link to that in the blog. Cliff, maybe we can get a link to that in the blog. The other thing I was wondering about with respect to sleep is Dawn, and I don't know if it has to do with sleep. What do you recommend for your clients? This is something I've really been focused on lately, and I've been pushing it not only in my own life, but in talking to any clients. What do you recommend for clients with respect to better ways of controlling their exposure during sleep?
Well, one of the things you have to look at more than anything else is how often should you be cleaning your bedding? Because a lot of people aren't aware of or not thinking about, for example, various problems with dust mites and all sorts of bugs that might be in the microorganisms of various sorts. So you do have to have that kind of discussion with your client if they're saying that their biggest problem is in the bedroom. You want to have them make sure that they're doing adequate cleaning and the cleaning is effective. It's not necessarily just throw it into the wash. You have to have some kind of antimicrobial cleanser that you're using in that regard. And then the other thing people don't think about is what about the mattress themselves? How often do you clean that? How often do you turn it over? Sometimes that's all you really need, but it has to be done because all of us don't necessarily take that into account when we think about what we're doing in our bedrooms. And then of course there's always potential other sources. You mentioned people have these various filters. You've seen probably on the television people doing different types of devices for their noses and for from their mouths. How effective are these? You know, are these evaluated by any agency of any government, and whether or not they're effective or not? So you have to be careful with what you put on your face. Sometimes it isn't necessarily going to help you. It might actually hinder you in some ways. So you have to be, you know, have to think of all the different things, just like we do in any other indoor air quality survey. You have to think of all the different things that may potentially be a source. How does that source get to be an exposure? And what do you do to mitigate and reduce the exposure so that you can sleep soundly?
How often do you recommend people change their sheets?
Well, I'm married to a very efficient and very particular woman who you know very well, and she.
Yes.
And she makes sure we clean them at least once a week. And I think that's probably a very good thing to do. I'm very much happy that we do that, because it certainly makes it much more comfortable for me. But I think it's important that people realize that, you know, it depends on your circumstances. A lot of people are looking at more exposure due to outdoor air pollution coming into their bedrooms, because people like to leave their windows open in their bedrooms at night. That's great, but it isn't necessarily going to prevent any type of exposure to dust mites or anything of that nature. So you have to judge it for yourself as to how often it should be cleaned. But it is important to make sure that you have a regular schedule for doing that.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do have dust mite allergies. I live in the country. Unfortunately, there's a farm behind me that grows timothy, which I'm terribly allergic to. What I've started to do, and it's helped me personally, is I shower in the evening so that I take, you know, all that pollen, etc., that's gotten on me during the day off before I go to bed. And then we've been changing the sheets twice a week, and when I do, I have to vacuum my bed off. And you know, anecdotally, it's helped me quite a bit. So, you know, for listeners out there that might be interested in that, you know, that's kind of the tips I give other people now. Let's move over to. I want to talk a little bit about the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, ACGIH. I know that you're now on their board of directors. I don't know how long you have been on their board of directors, but, you know, maybe you could just update listeners a little on, we don't hear much from ACGIH, at least I haven't in the last, you know, 5 or 10 years here. Every once in a while you'll get something, but update listeners on what the purpose of the organization is, and then what your position is, and maybe like how the group is funded.
Yeah, I mean, basically the ACGIH is the people that, well, the organization that comes out with the threshold limit values, the TLVs. These were the basis of the permissible exposure limits that OSHA now promulgates. Prior to OSHA coming into existence in 1972, the ACGIH had been putting out these TLVs, threshold limit values, 8-hour values, since the late 30s, early 40s. And when OSHA came into existence, one of the first things they did was adopt the most current list of TLVs. Unfortunately, over the next 45 years or so, since 1972, 46 years, that hasn't always kept up with what is happening with regards to the ACGIH TLVs. Those are updated on a yearly basis, and there's a TLV book that comes out, a booklet that comes out once a year with the date on it, saying what is the most current TLVs of over 400 different types of contaminants. And it also has a list of things that they're reviewing, the chemicals that they're reviewing, so that they can tell anybody who's interested in what they're going to be doing with those. You can look at the intended changes and notice the intended changes, and be prepared for things that may be coming out in a year or two. They also do things with regards to physical and biological threshold limit values as well. And so it's a comprehensive committee organization. I serve on the board of directors since January of this year, so I'm relatively new to the process. But one of the most interesting things I've done over the last year is sit in on the industrial ventilation book, the committee that works on that, and has a new book coming out every 3 years, thereabouts. They're coming out with a new one in early 2019. So listening to what they have to talk about in terms of ventilation, particularly ventilation for industrial facilities, but also ventilation for other types of facilities as well. It was quite fascinating to see their process and to listen to what they actually do. Their courses, the industrial ventilation courses, are sold out every time they run them. They run them about every 2 or 3 months. They get 40, 50 people coming to them, and they also are available online as well. So it's quite a good way for raising money. They're one of our bigger money makers, other than the TLV books. And the justification for the TLV books is also a big seller as well.
You know, I couldn't reach my TLV books, but I could reach this one here. I don't know if you could put this up for me, John, if you can zero in on it.
The bioaerosols book. That looks like it's well used there, Joe.
It has been, Don. If you can see, it's all marked up and very well used. I consider this kind of like the foundation for a lot with respect to bioaerosols. I'm wondering, has there been any talk about updating the bioaerosols book, or any other comments you have on that book?
Yes. One of the first things I asked when I became a member of the board of directors is, so what's happening with the bioaerosols book? And because it hasn't been updated since 1999. And I'm not going to go into a long history about why that has occurred, but I do want to say that that there has been discussion at the board of directors level about getting a committee together, a bioaerosols committee, to work on a new edition of that book. That's going to take some time. Just getting the committee together, start working on it, updating it. We're not looking about anything in 2019. It's more like in 2020 or 2021. But we are looking at progress to at least get the committee together and start looking at the book and certainly do an update, hopefully in 2 to 3 years. Good.
And let's move over to the AIHA Green Book, Don, which is Recognition, Evaluation, and Control of Indoor Mold. That one's even more beat up than the ACGIH book here. That one's right behind me as well. What's going on with the Green Book? Any revisions there? Anything new coming out?
Yeah, actually, this is the 10th anniversary of it. And one of the editors, who Cliff mentioned, David Miller, has been diligently working on getting an update done. He hopes to get it done by the end of this year so he can mark the 10th anniversary of it. I'm very hopeful he will be able to do that as well. But yes, he's been working very hard over the last year or so to update it. So I expect that will come out hopefully in 2020 as well.
Looking back over 10 years now, Don, it was a great document. We, use it quite a bit. Looking back now, what types of things would you think Don, David Miller is working on, and what types of recommendations have you given for updates on that book?
Well, I think more than anything else, what we have seen over the last 10 years has been an increased emphasis not just on microbial contamination, but on dampness itself, looking at what it is that a damp building is, and what constitutes dampness in a building. How do we define it? So I think there's going to be a need to update to include a lot more information about that, because it does the health effects that we see from folks that are living in a damp building are very much documented, and in many ways are more of a problem than when you have a microbial contamination. So dampness, I think, will be a greater emphasis. We're not going to steer away from mold or from microbial contamination, but I think there's going to be an added emphasis on things that are just damp and not necessarily exhibiting mold at that point. And I think that's going to be a big improvement perhaps in the book, and certainly a great addition to support people who are doing these investigations.
Don, over the years you've done, I'm sure, we all get sucked into the mold world, unfortunately. It's what people, it's what they can see, and I agree that dampness is the issue. Mold is just the symptom that you have an issue, and oftentimes we are kind of pushed into developing some kind of post-remediation verification to ensure that the mold problem has been fixed. And I'm wondering if you could comment on in your practice, what you recommended or wrote up with respect to PRV after mold projects?
Well, a discussion at the next IAQA conference on this. Ian Cole has put this together, and he's asked me to sit in on it as well. And my position is that you do need to do two things as post-remediation verification. Number one is a visual inspection, a very thorough visual inspection. There's been so many different ways of looking at a facility that really requires that you have experienced individual going in, making sure that everything that was going to cause a problem has been addressed in some way, either dried out, or removed, or in some way basically remediated. Now, in addition, I recommend air sampling at the end with using aerosol type of filters and pumps, and we do the sampling and we compare it to the outdoors. Do I know whether or not that is going to make a difference? It's hard to say, because basically, like we were talking earlier, this time of year, we have a lot of pollen and other types of materials in the air. It's hard to make that comparison with the indoors. I also live in a very harsh winter environment here. So if you try to do a comparison in January in Ottawa to outside to inside, it's virtually meaningless. You don't really get anything outside, and whatever you get inside may be very minimal, but it's certainly going to be greater than outside. So you have to take that into account and kind of look at it and say, well, the visual inspection is not finding anything. The air sampling is not giving us any warnings, not anything that's a real problem. But we know that the visual inspection is going to have the top priority in terms of determining whether the job is completed or not.
There's been some trend toward just doing particle counts as opposed to spore trap with an aerosol or whatever type of spore trap sampler you're going to use, or impactor, I guess. What are your thoughts on that? Do you do at least maybe like a pre-screen with a particle counter, or do you feel that's been oversold?
I'm not sure it's been oversold. I do think it's more effective when you're doing it at the perimeter of the containment during the abatement. I think that works reasonably well, because you can determine if there's any type of breach of any sort. At the end, I'm not sure that necessarily tells you anything about whether or not you have a continuing problem or not, because the dust or the particles could be coming from almost anywhere. And particularly if you have the containment under negative pressure, you could be having dragging stuff in from outside. So I'm not sure how effective it is there, but I do see where there may be some usefulness for particle counters, particularly during the abatement, to measure if there's any breaches in the containment. Okay.
Cliff, before we go to halftime, any follow-up questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Dawn, I'm going to break just a minute early here because when we get back, I want to go into some topics that I think are going to take us a little while. So we'll be right back with the second half of our interview. We got Dawn Weeks today. Good to have Dawn back on the show.
IAQradio Platinum sponsor is John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Gold sponsors are Particles Plus Engineers and Manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters and air quality monitoring instrumentation. Learn more at particlesplus.com. Count on us. Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com. And AEML Laboratories, free FedEx shipping, great pricing, same-day results, and never a rush fee. Learn more at AEMLinc.com. Association sponsors are the Indoor Air Quality Association, a multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Learn more at IAQA.org. And RIA, the Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry. Network with leaders. Learn more at restorationindustry.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half of our interview. We've got Dawn Weeks here, and Dawn, I want to go back to that discussion on PRV we had just a moment ago, and I want to switch gears and go over to sewage projects. I'm sure you've had many jobs where you go in and there's sewage, and I just recently had one here, and I'm curious what you recommend with respect to when you're brought in, because oftentimes they don't have a third party come in after sewage. But I just had one in a medical facility, and they wanted to have some kind of PRV done. I'm curious, what would you typically recommend for post-remediation verification on a sewage backflow?
Yeah, that's always been a difficult one. I've had a number of cases like that, particularly in homes, and you have to go to the visual inspection. You have an overflow of a toilet. One I would remember vividly is a toilet in a house in Connecticut where basically the family is away for a week, and of course the plumbing knows exactly when you go on vacation because that's when it breaks, and it flooded their entire their lower level of their house, where they had a rec room and they had a workshop and this bathroom. And then a garage, which was adjacent to it as well. By the time I got involved, of course, they were already well into the cleanup. Because that's something you have to do almost immediately, is to start doing the cleanup of it. You can't let it sit very long. The difficulty is always, where did it get into? Where did all the sewage go? I mean, you can do a surface clean of carpets or walls and anything else that you think might be affected by it. But if you have walls that are able to be penetrated by liquid, you might have reservoirs of this material inside your walls that you know nothing about. So when you get to the post-remediation, what we did in this particular case, we did what they thought was a thorough cleanup. But we were getting, just by regular air sampling for mold spores, we saw, lots of very high concentrations, and we were wondering, well, where is it coming from? Well, when they opened up the walls, that's when they started to see the mess. So visual inspection has to go beyond just, what you see from what, that in the building itself. You have to go inside the walls, you have to go under the floor, and you have to really look very carefully as to where the sewage may have gone. This ended up in an insurance lawsuit, in which I ended up having to testify in. And they asked me, well, what would you have done differently? Well, one of the things is I would have called myself, in earlier, hopefully, and made a decision whether or not to open up the walls right away. And I think that would have helped in terms of the situation. By the time I was involved, it was supposedly clean, and it wasn't. And this is one of the biggest problems with sewage, is you just don't know how extensive the problem may be until you actually start knocking down walls and looking inside.
I've got to follow up on that. I've never seen much, if anything, on how hazardous it is to leave that sewage behind. Is there research on that you're aware of? I mean, do people actually develop bacterial infections after sewage damage in homes or in buildings? I've just always wondered about that.
I have not seen much data about health effects so much as basically it's a building condition problem. You're weakening the walls. You're causing problems with the wood, or with the plywood, or with the drywall, things of that nature. In some cases, it's visible. It's easy to deal with the visible. It's where it's invisible that the problem may be really problematic. But as far as health effects are concerned, I think more it's a problem for the people doing the cleanup. You want to make sure that they're well protected, particularly if they're doing it with black water. You want to make sure that they have adequate protection while they're cleaning. There's a lot of times, you're scrubbing and you're using your hands to do things. You need to make sure you have adequate protection for your hands and and make sure you have adequate protection for your clothing as well. So I think it's more of that type of situation rather than directly affecting people's health. I think mainly because when you have sewage backup, you're going to clean it up quick. Whereas you have mold, it's not as quick. Sometimes people don't live for years with mold. But when you have sewage backup, you're going to call somebody pretty quickly to get it cleaned up. So I don't think the problems with health really have time to develop in that particular case.
Joe, if I might,
please.
Yesterday I had to update my pest control license, and I had to take the core class, and that's the basic course that pest control licensing is based upon. And what was interesting is in the course I took, the fellow that was teaching it is an expert on swimming pools. And what I'm going to suggest both to you guys and to the listeners is just do some research on fecal matter, diarrhea, and swimming pools.
Yeah.
And what's absolutely crazy is the fact that you can have, one piece of visible large fecal matter, one log in a swimming pool, and it can cause a major, major problem. And we have a local amusement park here called Kennywood. I'm sure Joe's very, very familiar with it. And they actually have had a ride, which I believe now is closed, the Log Jammer, Joe. And
Sure.
Essentially they would get about, 20 people, and you'd be in this log, and essentially you go up this incline, and then you go down, and it goes into a swimming pool, at the bottom. And they had this accumulation of water in that pool. There was a local person from Pittsburgh who got splashed in the eye, and he ended up with major corneal damage because he ended up getting a microorganism that they found in the water that damaged his eye, and they couldn't even remove it all. And they had to scratch his cornea with a razor blade and so on and so forth. So I actually think the sewage may be a whole lot worse than any of us ever thought. And the CDC has a lot of documents on it. And what I'll do is, as part of the blog, I think I'll put some of the documents in there that, in the event that people want to research it.
That would be a great thing to see, Cliff. I'm curious, and I agree with Don. I think the largest hazard is for those who are doing the cleanup, but obviously there's some potential for others that are still living there, especially if they're immune compromised, to develop issues related to microbial contamination. Don, one final question on that particular topic. What are your thoughts on using ATP sampling to either verify that areas have been affected or areas have been properly cleaned after water damage events such as a Category 3 water damage?
I'm not sure that is as effective as using the spore trap. I mean, basically, when you do any type of sampling, you have to be careful what you're dealing with. One of the projects I'm working on right now with a team from AIHA relates to the problems with the inaccuracies of various types of measurements that we do. Okay, and the percentage is of different types of answers you may get from a laboratory can be a plus or minus 120%. You could get results that say 0, and you get something that says 120,000 colony forming units. So you don't know what's going to be really effective by taking any type of air sampling. You have to take into account the margin for error. You have to take into account the media. You have to take into account the laboratory's ability to analyze it. There's so many different factors that, as I see my friend Jack Springston on the chat line, there's tons and tons of useless samples there that are being taken. And really, it goes back to doing a visual inspection, thorough visual inspection of the facility before you get into any type of sampling, using any type of device. No matter what it is that you're using, there's always a big error potentially built into this type of sampling, and you just have to be careful whatever you do to make sure that you recognize it's just one tool that you use, and it's not the only tool that you use.
Okay, I think that's fair enough. Let's move to the next topic. I wanted to, and part of the reason actually we had been corresponding as much as we were here recently was the Phil Moray Scholarship. Wondering if you could update listeners on how that went. We put a couple announcements in the blog. As I understand it, things went pretty well. You're putting together, helping put together that scholarship fund. I think that's through the AIHA, and maybe you could tell listeners a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I'm really happy about, is to make an announcement that we did in fact have a matching amount donated by people that listen here and also others. We had myself and Lanchi basically said to the IEQ committee at AIHA back in May in Philadelphia that we would match a donation up to $10,000 so that we could have a scholarship. And over the course of the next 2 months, everyone pulled together, and we had a donation of a little over $10,000, which we Lanchi and I have just recently matched, which means we can, in fact, award a scholarship at the next AIHA meeting in Minneapolis. So I'm very pleased about that, and I want to thank everybody who has donated. I think I have thanked everybody already personally, but I want to thank anybody who's listening today too for everything that they donated. It was really a great campaign, and we're looking forward for that first Maury scholarship to be awarded in Minneapolis.
So that will all go to one person?
Well, not all. No, what we're doing is we want to have a continuous scholarship. So what you do is you put together a certain amount of money, and the minimum that AHA recommends is $25,000 that you put into the bank and earn interest on. So the first scholarship will be approximately $1,000, which will then award to any, to the student. I would recommend that if you're still interested, please donate more, because the more money that we have in the Maury scholarship, the more scholarships we can award. But it's on the basis of the interest that they know they can get. That's what we award, and then it continues every year going forward.
Dawn, I have a follow-up. Was there something that occurred between you and Phil, some incident or whatever that really touched you and, made you decide to do this?
Yeah, I would say that he's one of the people that I really admired always when I worked with him on AIHA stuff. I didn't work with him personally. I didn't have that opportunity. He was always a gracious individual. He's from Pennsylvania, as you both of you probably know.
Right.
Down in Gettysburg, and he always had a kind word to everybody. He was very soft-spoken, but boy, what he said had a powerful impact. When I first encountered Phil was probably about 1987, 88. We had the first international symposium in indoor air quality by AIHA, and he was one of the speakers. And when he talked about, the type of work he was doing, it changed my entire life. I mean, basically, I spent the next 25 years doing a lot with mold and moisture and in buildings, and because of his presentations. And so I felt that it was appropriate. Unfortunately, he has now passed away about 2 years ago. So we miss his guidance in a lot of these things. And so for me personally, it was a life-changing event to have met Phil and to have listened to his presentations.
Dawn, go ahead, Cliff.
No, I was going to say it's one of those things that I'm just glad that we did interview him, and we have an archived interview on IAQradio. So.
Yep. Put a link. We should probably put a link to that on the blog, Cliff.
Okay.
A good thing to do. Dawn, you mentioned, and I kind of neglected to put this in the questions, but I'm sure you could come up with a thought or two off the top of your head. The AIHA conference, I didn't ask you any questions on that. Can you kind of update listeners? It was April or May of this year in Philadelphia, I believe. I didn't make it to that either. And I'm wondering what were the key points, the highlights that you may want to let listeners know about? Sure.
I think the nice thing about the AIHA conferences over the years is the continuity from one year to the next for different types of topics that are important. I think there's a renewed emphasis in the AIHA area for indoor air quality. The Indoor Environmental Quality Committee is a very active committee, and I would recommend anybody who's interested in indoor air quality to participate in its meetings. They meet not only at the conference, but also at the online. The types of presentations I saw mainly were oriented towards more, I would say, exposures in industrial facilities that have been neglected or have not been as well taken care of as we'd like to, and that's particularly overseas. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know that in North America, the amount of industry that we have has decreased somewhat. We still have very good industry, particularly in the heartlands. But there's a lot more going on overseas in places like China, India, in Southeast Asia. And those exposures there are the same ones that were encountered by workers in North America back in the 50s and 60s. And that is really where we're looking to put more renewed emphasis on the international problems that are occurring there. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of the presentations on are things that are happening there and what they're trying to do to prevent a problem down the road for a lot of these workers. In North America, we focus more on office in those types of environments. And the types of indoor air quality reports that I see really relates more to problems with buildings that are new. One of the things that struck me, and I'll relate this back, is that at summer camp we had a great presentation about buildings in Great Britain, offered by a terrific professor. And one of the things she mentioned is that the average age, the length of time that a building exists in urban areas is 16 years. 16 wow. years, which to me is like that's an indication that there is some problems with these buildings. If they were good buildings, they would be lasting a lot longer. But these buildings are not lasting because I think one of the problems is they don't have very good indoor air quality. People just complain about it because it's too tight, or their sunlight is the wrong way. They're not given adequate shading of any sort. So I think there's something to be said if we're seeing buildings going up, being built, and being torn down within 16 years, there's something wrong with the way in which we're doing buildings right now. And I think one of the problems is indoor air quality.
That's a good point, Don. And in fact, I know the restoration industry's global watchdog has been working hard on getting that particular professor to join us for a show. So I think that's coming up not too far from now. The other thing I was curious about, I know we're going to talk about this in a moment when we go over some of the summer camp presentations. At AIHA, I would imagine, not being there, I'm just guessing, but I would imagine Legionella is getting a good bit of attention. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. Legionella is a major problem here in North America in many of our cities. This time of year is one of the primary times when we have problems. I mean, we just had a recent outbreak again in New York City. There is a subcommittee that works on the AIHA Legionella booklet or guide, and they're looking to update that. But one of the ones that is very good and just recently has come out is the new ASHRAE standard 188 that talks about Legionella and how to deal with water system problems. So certainly that's a major topic, and it was at the AIHA conference, but it also was at the ASHRAE conference that I attended down in Houston as well. And there's a lot of discussion on how to manage water inside buildings and what is the best way to handle water systems. So I think it's going to be a big issue continuing for quite a lengthy time.
Yeah, these water features seem to be more and more popular these days, and I don't know that the architects putting them in or the building owners paying for them realize what the potential issues are.
That was one of the most dramatic things I saw in Jack Springsteen's presentation, where he had that building that had like a 100-foot waterfall of some sort. I think it was in Shanghai or something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's just asking for problems.
Probably waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Don, let's jump over to that. We got to talk to you. I got to talk to you and Lan Chi at summer camp, Joe Steebrook's Westford Building Science Symposium. I had some great speakers this year. I thought this year was nice. There was a little more emphasis on indoor air quality. I'm wondering if you could go over with listeners some of the key points you recall from that particular. You get around, buddy. I'll tell you. From for that trip.
Yeah, that was a great summer camp. I really appreciate the invitation every year to it. I mean, it was some great presentations, and the one you mentioned about indoor air quality from Brett Singer, we talked briefly, about some of that. One of the things that I caught right at the front of it was that he quoted the Corsi Code, as they call it. Rich Corsi, being a good friend of myself and also Brett. The numbers he gives is 79 is the average lifespan. 69 years we spend indoors. 54 of those years we spend in our home. 26 of those years we spend in bed. 4.3 years we spend in vehicles, and only 6 years of our lives do we actually spend outdoors. So if you look at that, what should we be doing in terms of emphasis? You obviously kind of look at what you're doing inside indoors.
Absolutely. That was a great, he did a very nice job. I think he opened a lot of architects, engineers, builders attend that show. I think he opened a lot of eyes. Any other highlights from Brett's presentation?
One of the most interesting things I thought was that when he talked about some of their research that they're doing in California about what's going on with ventilation in particularly new housing, he said that sure, there's a lot more ventilation than there used to be in older houses, particularly operable windows and kitchen exhaust. The problem is, even though they're built into the houses, people don't use them. So a lot of times you got a kitchen exhaust that the frequency of use is like 1 out of 10. Or something of that nature. Windows themselves, people may have or want to have operable windows, but they're not using them, and so you don't get that the infiltration that you might have from outdoors. So I thought that was fascinating. That there's a real problem with that. And he mentioned gas burners in particular being a problem with regards to the source of NO2, formaldehyde, ultrafine particles. Well, if you're not using your ventilation system, you're adding to your problems inside those homes.
Yeah. I thought he did, and then he mentioned some real easy tips too, like cook on the back burner. Number one, use your ventilation, but secondly, cook on the back burner. He was pretty negative on the unvented fireplaces and the kind of decorative in a way. He was pretty negative on those as well, and I tend to agree with that. What other presentation? I know you got to mention John Straub's presentation on moisture. That was just phenomenal. Well, tell us a little bit about that one.
That was like I think we mentioned before we started the recording. I mean, that was a whole semester's worth of moisture physics in a 2.5-hour presentation. More information than I've ever heard before about moisture physics. I was just astounded about the different phases of water, the way he talked about the difference between being porous and being permeable, how most building materials are porous, but not necessarily permeable. What is the nature of the building material is as important as the nature of the water. So it really was a fascinating presentation because it really gave us a lot of details about how to look at buildings differently in terms of moisture and how it gets into buildings. And so John did a terrific job. I thought the part about the wood in particular was the most interesting thing I've ever seen. And ever seen about wood, okay? Maybe not the most interesting of everything I've ever seen in my life, but definitely about wood, about how it works. And one of the things that I always worried about and I never thought about really as to how it occurs was how, on the outside of a house, why does paint start to peel off? Why does it start to crackle? Well, he mentioned that in many cases, it's the wood that's bowing and bending that's causing the paint to come off. Well, that's a really great insight because many people don't even think of that in terms of why they're, we're just repainted again. Well, what about the wood itself? Why is it doing that in terms of the humidity levels and in terms of the weather that you have in your area? So I thought it was just an overall great presentation.
I also thought what was really important was how water deposits on materials in layers, essentially, and he described those layers and that the bottom layer was most tightly bound to the water.
Yeah.
Water. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yes, he made a very good, well, you also had some good animations as well, which were great.
Yes.
But they showed how basically we can't think of water just being one phase. There's a variety of different phases that occur on a surface water, and the ones closest to the underlying surface are the key as to whether or not you have whether or not the water gets into the material or not. So thinking again not just about moisture in a building, but thinking about the way in which moisture gets into the building was really a critical part of what he was able to present, and it was really eye-opening for me. So I'm sure it was for many people.
And I think, Cliff, I'm pretty sure I can get you a couple of those slides, and I know John would let us use them, that maybe we could put in the blog. They were very good, especially I think when he had a slide that kind of showed how water gets into buildings in different forms, etc., and then how it comes out of buildings. It was a really great presentation. Dawn, we've got about 4 minutes left here. Any other presentations? I know you mentioned Jack Springston. You might want to mention that one again, and any others that might have caught your attention at the Building Science Summer Camp.
I'm going to mention Jack because, well, first of all, he's a great friend, but in addition, I think he did a terrific job about Legionella. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the discussion on biofilm and how it builds up on shower heads and faucets and in cooling towers. It's really the critical issue with regards to whether or not you have Legionella or not in the building. So it's important to recognize that as being part of what we do. The other thing you mentioned was why do they have water management problems? And it turns out that 65% of them are process failures, 52% of it is human error, and 35% of it is equipment not working. So you're really looking at more at the process itself failing and in people's errors in terms of how things result in a growth of Legionella and then a problem with Legionella. And he mentioned the ASHRAE standard also with regards to building water systems, the 12-2000, which I think is a very good way of working with a building owner as to how they manage their water systems. It goes beyond just Legionella. It's really talking about all the different issues that you might have with water systems.
Okay, I want to close this out. I want to talk a little bit about the big picture, Dawn. You've been around for over 25 years. I don't want to date you too much, maybe 30 years.
How about 43 years? How's that?
How many?
43.
43 years. Wow, good for you. Good for you, buddy. You look great, by the way. What over that lengthy career in indoor air quality and industrial hygiene? What has changed with, over those past 25, 30, 40 years in these fields? What big changes do you see?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm in the process. I'm going to be presenting this at the AIBC conference. I'm calling it a modern history of indoor air quality, starting in 1973 and building right up to now, 45 years. You might remember what happened because you're almost my age, Joe, and Cliff too. 1973, the energy crisis, the first one.
Yep.
That was really, one of the things that triggered a lot of problems with regards to changes particularly in the indoor environment. And then, of course, it was followed up with the 1978 one, which really caused people to say, well, this is not something we can ignore. So what has changed since then is the way we treat our buildings. We don't necessarily treat our buildings the same as we did back in 1972 or 71, where there was vast openings in the buildings, infiltration, windows open, doors open. If you want to think about back in that period of time, you commonly had homes that had operable windows. You didn't necessarily even have buildings, office buildings, or anything else that didn't have operable windows as well. And then, of course, our industrial facilities were always open to the air in many ways. We have done a lot to tighten up the buildings because of the energy crisis more than anything else. But the problem with that is we haven't necessarily spent as much time thinking about what does that affect in terms of the indoor air quality for the people living or working or playing in those buildings. So I find it very fascinating that people are going back to natural ventilation again. If you've taken a look at anything, any of the tennis that's taking place at the US Open, first of all, it's enormously hot there. They're having major problems with that. But the Louis Armstrong building tennis center that they built is naturally ventilated even when the roof is on. So they have these vast panels that allow air to come in. That's a big change from what everybody thought. If you remember some of the studio or the stadiums that they built, they were completely mechanically ventilated. In some cases well, some cases not so well. So there's a big change happening now in terms of that as well. So I think we're going from that era where we were all dependent on mechanical systems, maybe back to something that's a little bit more manageable in terms of natural air ventilation systems.
They're going to be a little bit more of a mix now, and as opposed to just all open or all closed.
That's right. I think that has to be. You have to take into account the climate you live in, the type of, for in particular, PM2.5 particulates you have in the air, and really work with that in mind in terms of the type of ventilation that you want to have in that area.
Well, let's get out the crystal ball here, Don. Final question, maybe I got one after this, the usual finish, but what do you see as the future of this industry? What should we be watching for? Where are we headed?
Well, one of the things we haven't had a chance to talk about much is Indoor Environmental Quality, the Global Alliance, which I'm the president of. And I want to mention that simply because it is an area that I feel that I'm going to be spending a great deal of time over the next 10, well, maybe not 10 years, but maybe over the next 3 or 4 years. The reason is that by having these various groups work together, and then we have representatives in North America, from Europe, we now have India, we're talking to Brazil, we have potentially Italy as well. These groups have been working nationally. Well, now we're going to be working internationally and talking about the various types of problems that may exist. And if you look at the number of people who are affected indoor air quality-wise, you know that those are the areas of growth. India alone has, it's estimated, 2.5 million people who die every year from indoor air quality from cooking stoves.
Wow.
So you want to look at that as being an issue that's going to be definitely affecting the world as we go on. And we have solutions. We just need to work together to try to get those solutions to the people who really need them. Yeah,
I'm really glad. I totally blanked on the IEQ Global Alliance there, Dawn. I'm glad you brought it up. That was something that started out of ASHRAE, or is that?
Well, ASHRAE was certainly one of the instigators. Bill Bonfleck, when he was president, that was one of his presidential, he wanted to appoint people to that committee. So it's about 2014 when we got started, and it's going strong. And we were hoping that that we'll see continued growth and more cooperation between the various groups.
So you've got ASHRAE, IAQA, AIHA, I think is a part of that. What other, just maybe real quick, a couple others?
Yeah, AWMA, and then there's an organization well, I mentioned AIVC when I'm going to their convention.
Yep.
RECA, which is REHVA, which is the European, it's 27 countries who deal with ventilation problems in their national areas, but they cooperate on the basis of 27 nations there. So and then we have ASHRAE, which is the India group as well, and we're looking at Brava, which is the Brazilian group. They're also involved with ventilation, but also involved with indoor air quality. So I see it as a growing area, and I'm hoping that it will be a highly successful cooperative program going forward.
And how long does the presidency last there? Is that a rotating thing, or how long?
I got to convince somebody to take my place. That's what it comes down to.
So you'll be there for a while, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, great.
Maybe Cliff can take maybe Cliff, you should take the responsibility for this.
Well, I just learned the other day the United States is energy independent now, so we can go back to the old way and let the rest of the world sort it out. So.
Well, Dawn, any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to add before we go?
Yeah, this may be my last time on Indoor IAQ Radio since I'm now retired. I want to thank you guys particularly, both you and Joe and Cliff. You guys have made an amazing difference in this field, and I want to recognize that as being something that has been very valuable, not only to myself but to all the listeners that have been here. So I just want to thank you guys for all you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Don. Coming from you, that means a lot. I know you got a good heart, and that you certainly volunteer enough, and wonderful family. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll definitely be having you back. You can't get away from us that easy, buddy.
All right, that sounds great.
All right, this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guest, Don Weeks. Great show. Of course, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. At the controls, John, you got to have faith. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners. Hey, next week, we're going to do a contents show, right, Cliff? We got the RIA contents crowd coming in. We're going to talk about how, contents is a huge topic after mold or fires, or after water damage. How do you deal with the contents? We've got some people from the Carolina Conservancy coming in. Looking forward to a great show. We'll be back next Friday at noon for the next live broadcast of IAQradio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.